Well, here I am, just over a year and a half out from that first fateful video on this series, and just over a year out from starting the hormone replacement therapy that I realized I needed after making that video. Much to the confusion of my commenters at the time, I didn't really know what I was. Looking back on it, the video is really vague and confusing, but it's making it that allowed me to figure the what out. Wandering Sun made me realize I'm trans. And then I made a number of people realize that they are trans, and then some of them have made some other people realize that they are trans. It's a whole little beautiful queer circle of life.
The wave of transgenders is coming for you.
For about as long as my first video on it has been out, I've been planning to go back and do more episodic analyses of Wandering Sun, going over the big points and ideas of each given episode, sort of along the lines of Digi's Eva series. But, you know, complete. And, as you can see here, I've settled on compiling my looks into each episode into one video. I won't just slot that video on episode 1 in here, but I hope you can forgive a bit of a summation of its ideas so that this video can serve as a standalone overview of the entire series. Thank you, my kittens.
ただ、羨ましいなって思って。私もあなたたちみたいに子供の頃にそういうの分かり合える友達がいたらよかったなって。
The central concept of Wandering Sun that you should keep in mind as I go through each of these episodes' individual points is the value of having people who can understand you and your experiences. This is a thread that the series weaves throughout the course of its run, both that the root of many issues queer people face is a misunderstanding of them, and that the greatest solidarity and comfort you can receive is having someone else who does understand you.
でも高槻さんやまこちゃんが分かってくれてるって。それでいろいろ大丈夫なんだって思えて。もし僕まこちゃんのこと分かってないなら分かりたいよ。もしまこちゃんを笑う人がいたらちゃんと怒るから。
It can feel like society as a whole is gaslighting you as a trans person, with newspapers falsely fear-mongering about trans kids getting surgeries at age 14, and a massive portion of the population saying, science doesn't care about your feelings, transgenderism is a mental illness, when it is irrefutably, objectively untrue to claim being trans is a mental illness according to the scientific community. You need people to help ground you, to show you that you and your experiences aren't an isolated incident.
高槻さんがいてくれれば僕は本当に大丈夫になれる。付き合ったりしなくても高槻さんはきっと僕を誰よりも近い場所で理解してくれるから。
In light of these ideas it puts forth, it is so powerful that through its impeccable craft, this series manages to itself be a remarkable vehicle for spreading an understanding of the experiences of trans people, and in so doing also manages to be a remarkable vehicle for communicating to those trans people that their experiences are understood. Wandering Sun not only makes a statement of the issues faced by trans people and what can be done to help, but has made an actual material impact in the fight to address those issues, and provides the very help it posits is needed. This is proactive media in action.
女の子ってなんでできてる？制服ブカブカなのを買ってもらったはずなのになんだか窮屈に感じるなって。
The role this first episode serves is getting the audience into the shoes of Shu, getting them to understand and begin rooting for her. While this aim is pretty typical for a first episode, the shot Wandering Sun has to hit is made much trickier by the experience that it must convey an understanding of. Thankfully, however, it hits a perfect bullseye in this regard. The direction and storyboarding of series director A. Aoki does a remarkable job of getting you into the head of Shu. Throughout this episode, and specifically when she's out in public presenting as female, she is constantly framed as being walled in and isolated from the world around her, by the world around her. It's a perfect visual representation of the anxious sense of being cut off from everyone else you experience in that position. And having now experienced that same anxiety many times over myself, I can say that with even more confidence than the first time around. This sense of isolation continues into the episode's climactic scene, this time tinged with legitimate fear and heartbreak as well. As Maho walks in on Shu, the music sharply cuts out and cuts your heartstrings with it, leaving that heart of yours unsuspended to fall into the pit of your stomach. Shot 1, the window divides Maho from Shu. Shot 2, it cuts them off again. Shot 3, this time the bedpost cuts them off from each other. Shu is alone, in her own house with her own family. The first shot in which Maho and Shu share the frame without anything separating the two of them is when she crosses that boundary not to provide support or empathy or love, but to assault Shu, forcing her to remove those clothes, to give up and deny her identity. She is forced to shove Maho back across that barrier, forced to create this isolation for the sake of her own protection, and as she rises, the wig falls from her head, that piece of Shu's identity having now been taken from her. This isn't an abstraction. 10% of trans kids who come out to their families face violence from those families, and that's according to the largest study of transgender people conducted to date. This is a lived reality for thousands of kids across the United States alone, as is the homelessness Shu's running away here alludes to. Wandering Sun doesn't pull punches, it doesn't waste fucking time, it doesn't focus on trying to communicate the minute specificities of the trans experience. It highlights those elements that hit upon fundamental core human experiences. It takes things that everyone understands to be unpleasant, to be unfair, and tells you, yeah, this sucks, doesn't it? Do you know what being trans feels like? Could you imagine it? No? Well, do you know what it feels like to be anxious expressing your genuine self? Do you know what it feels like to be isolated when you do express that self? Can you imagine what it would be like to face violence from those closest to you if they saw you expressing yourself? Congratulations, you now know what being trans feels like, or at the very least can imagine what it'd feel like fairly accurately. Here is what you're faced with if you're trans, just for being trans.
みんなが見てる。やだ。やだ。ニトリ君。
Shu gets yanked out of her destructive downward spiral by Takatsuki's unexpected words. Watching this scene was always hard, it was always deeply emotional. Now, with new perspective, it's scary. I know these feelings, I know what paths society directs trans people down, and Shu is following the directions laid out for her by society here. All of this only furthers the incredible rush of comfort and relief that Takatsuki ends up providing, both to Shu and to the feels of the audience. The immense amount of tonal and emotional tension built up, and the immediacy with which it snaps back to a relaxed state upon his appearance strikes the viewer hard with just how important the comfort of someone who has shared your experience is. And so, as its first episode draws to a close, we thoroughly understand, on an immediate sensory and emotional level, what Shu's experiences are like and why we should care about her. We learn the answer to...
What are little girls made of?
最初はね、楽しかったの。一緒に学校に行ったり、3人で写真を撮ったりしたわ。ニトリ君と私と高月さん。
While most of the characters do get introduced in episode 1, it's the second episode where their personalities really get established, and where their web of relationships is spun out for us to see. She's a real fighter. Sasa wishes everyone would just get along, and Chiba hates everyone. Oh, also Momoko is gay as hell. For a series focused on the importance of having others who understand you, on the harm a lack of understanding can cause, and on how to build that bridge of understanding, the interpersonal dynamics of its characters are an absolutely key element. What is the root of Maho's resentment of Shu? We learn here that it's jealousy over Shu's cuteness, and that this jealousy of Maho's makes her especially likely to lash out at Shu's gender expression, because if she's presenting as female, she'll essentially be competing with Maho, in Maho's eyes anyway. Maho is so caught up in this competitiveness that she can't even stand to let Shu bathe first, even when she doesn't want to take a bath herself at that point in time. The strong use of blocking returns once again, which makes sense given that this is another episode storyboarded by A. Aoki. I especially love the shot where as everyone walks home together in an attempt to create some unity and goodwill, the whole group gets in between these two pillars before it cuts. Except for Chiba, who still isn't ready to be a part of that group. The one other thing I'd be remiss not to mention is this fantastic moment where Shu gets called a girl for being awkward and off to the side while changing, and she just sits there with a dumb smile on her face for like 10 straight seconds because of how happy that made her. Most episodes of the series have more little details like this, more #translife moments, but because there's so much characterization and backstory to establish in this episode, there just isn't room for much else. Don't get me wrong, the stellar witty dialogue of the series makes those interactions a blast to watch. I only just noticed this random girl trying to hit her teacher up. I think that Mari Okada is probably the best writer in anime when it comes to fun, quippy character interaction, and she brings out the best in these great characters here, making pretty much all of them endearing.
高月さん、男になりたいんでしょ？合ってるかもね。いるもの。そういう優柔不断な男。
Chi is just utterly wild, Maho is so adorably petty, Chiba is hilariously edgy and self-serious, Mako is such a disaster straight girl, and Sasa is trying so hard to get everyone to be friends. There isn't a ton more to say about this one that wouldn't just be summarizing those relationships though, since showing us everyone's baggage with and attitudes towards each other is most of what happens here. And so, as its second episode draws to a close, Wandering Sun has set up the primary cast of major players in the ideological conflicts that will spring up around Shu and Takatsuki, and around how they handle and present their genders. As we learn, before these characters can reach a resolution among each other, they'll have to work through a whole lot of
hate, despise.
二人はある夜、秘密の場所で秘密の願掛けをした。女の子は男の子に、男の子は女の子に。
With all of that taken care of, Episode 3 can once again narrow its scope. Now that both Shu and the broader cast are established, it's time to take a deep look at the Chiba, Shu, Takatsuki love triangle. This is the little friend group that Shu was able to safely explore and express her femininity within, and the same goes for Takatsuki and his masculinity. So learning all this helps us learn a lot about the more specific elements of how these two relate to gender, moving past the broad strokes of I want to be a girl and wear girls' clothes that we got in the first 2 episodes. Fittingly then, in addition to that history, this episode also explores the particulars of Shu and Takatsuki's present-day anxieties and dysphoria. It's here where we learn the complexity of Chiba and her relation to Shu. While she's an enthusiastic source of encouragement and enablement to Shu, lavishing her with cute outfits to try on, Chiba is doing it, at least in decent part, for her own satisfaction. She bowls over Shu's desires and borders on using her as a dress-up doll, after Chiba lets us know in episode 1 that Shu is her image of cuteness. It goes to show that even superficial support of trans people can come in dehumanizing and objectifying forms, and it's an issue Chiba will have to grapple with over the course of the series. Takatsuki, meanwhile, is someone who shares Shu's own experiences, someone who can go, I wish I had your chest, and in doing so provide comfort to her, simply by showing that she isn't going through her dysphoria alone. These characters are now in the throes of puberty, so Takatsuki is forcibly confronted with the growth of his breasts, told during basketball practice that he needs to start wearing a bra, and Shu has to start dreading the deepening of her voice. A fantastic delicate touch is employed in communicating their anxieties. In an anime original scene, Takatsuki forgets the bag with his newly purchased bra at the bus stop, a reflection of his distaste for the bra, and also of his desire to be able to forget about his ever-encroaching chest. And speaking of reflections, those are exactly what enhanced this scene here. Not anime original, but greatly improved over its manga counterpart. As Takatsuki awkwardly starts asking Shu about whether she'd like to wear a bra, we see him as a reflection in the medicine cabinet. Cut to his face when he finally comes out and states the question frankly, and then it goes back to showing him and Shu as a reflection while they both get awkward following that directness. In the manga, this conversation is portrayed through a simple back and forth of their faces, but here the anime imbues their exchange with a palpable sense of the nervous awkwardness involved in talking about this stuff with someone else. There's a feeling that it's weird or perverse to talk about what should be mundane aspects of your life as a girl or guy, because you're a trans girl or a trans guy. There's a reason why, in spite of my underwear quite literally being panties, I never refer to them as such. Personally, my choice of substitute is pantsu, since that's goofy enough to diffuse the awkwardness. It's because a guy having a particular interest in panties would not necessarily unjustifiably be seen as a bit weird, and enough of society views me as a guy who is prone to creepy perversion no less, to make that association uncomfortable. And we're confronted with yet more heartbreaking instances of the incorrect puberty resolutely advancing. Fearing the changes that are to come, Mako and Shu record themselves before it's too late, preserving the memory of the voices that they are powerless to protect. It isn't a dramatic scene, but it's one of the series' most emotionally affecting. There's few experiences more frustrating and hopeless than watching your body march on in the opposite of the direction it should, leaving you behind to day by day feel your hairline receding, feel the adolescent growth hormones that would empower estrogen to grow your breasts more fully draining away. The tragically beautiful fantasy that Shu has later that night only furthers the assault on the audience with feelings of sad longing. All we can do is wish for eventual happiness for our unfairly burdened
Romeo and Juliet.
こんなのがあるんだ。
そうよ。体なんてね、ある程度ならどんな風にだってなるのよ。
Injecting some much-needed empowerment and hope into things is episode 4 here, which focuses on a multitude of ways of taking agency over your gender and gender presentation. After the depressing reality that is his figure with a swimsuit on, Takatsuki heads to Yuki's house for some comfort and counsel, and is shown a bra that will flatten his chest. He may not be able to stop the changes that are happening to him, but there are tools out there that can enable Takatsuki to fight through them and express his true self regardless of those changes. This scene does carry with it a tinge of sadness though. Sadness at the accuracy of Yuki's phrase describing things like this bra. Ways to protect yourself. At the end of the day, this stuff isn't valuable just because it can help relieve dysphoria. The risk that you can mitigate for yourself by being able to better conform to rigid preconceived notions is something you have to take into account when considering it as well. Later in the episode, Takatsuki brings this newfound optimism and agency over into his shopping trip with Shu, asking her if she'd like a girl's swimsuit. When Shu replies that she doesn't have breasts, so Takatsuki says that the point here is whether or not she wants to wear one. Fuck it. Why shouldn't you wear a girl's swimsuit just because you don't have breasts? If that's what you want, if that's what best represents you, you shouldn't be limited in that regard by society. Now, as established, limiting yourself in that regard in order to be mindful of your safety is absolutely valid. I said you shouldn't be limited in that regard, not that you aren't. Shu seemingly takes this call to action to heart, because she builds up the courage to tell Takatsuki that she wants him to see her as a girl. Not only this, but she goes ahead and says that she sees Takatsuki as a boy. For this scene, we get this really neat framing where the two of them are pinned in to one half of the screen, restricted by society's narrow view of gender, and it's all the more fitting because it's the walls of the bathroom, of a gendered space, providing that restriction. To complete this self-identification, casting off that which society has branded them with upon birth, they exchange names, refusing to be bound by society's expectations. However, society is still a looming force, and if you choose to self-identify, you'll be challenged on that by those around you. We see that cleverly demonstrated when she says, "My name is," only to be cut off by her sister filling in that blank with Shu, as she calls her name to say she's taking too long bathing.
僕の名前は
Chiba also represents a resistance to Shu's self-identification, questioning Shu's motives for wanting to be a girl, but once again that newfound confidence of hers shows its head. She asserts the fact that she doesn't want to be a girl for Takatsuki's sake, for the sake of her crush on Takatsuki, but for herself. To end things off, Chiba leaves the question of surgery up in the air. As Yuki says, you can do anything to your body within reason, but Shu isn't ready to decide on that one just yet. It can be crucial for younger queer people to hear that there's help in place for them, paths forward to find some self-realization even in the face of a lack of access to something like hormone blockers. Sometimes you just need to hear someone say,
I'll give you my name.
やっぱりやりたいんだよね、ジュリエット。どうしても笑われてもいいからさ。誰も笑ったりしないよ。ニトリンにはわかんないよ。ごめんね、愚痴っぽくなっちゃった。とにかく頑張るってこと。
Letting people know about the agency available for them to take is great, but there can often be a darker side to that enthusiastic encouragement, namely, those who don't receive that same level of enthusiastic support and get left behind. All too often, it's a pretty narrow conception of transness that gets put onto a pedestal and praised. All too often, that conception is of a white, thin, petite, pretty, traditionally feminine trans girl. More masculine trans women, trans people of color, trans masculine people as a whole, far too often these groups aren't given the same visibility. People falling into these groups aren't validated in the same way, or given the same inspirations to aspire towards. And look, maybe a little bit of that greater visibility is because us white girls just cannot stop taking selfies like, oh my god. But the vast majority of what causes this rests upon the community's shoulders. Those overlooked trans people that don't line up with the ideal are who Mako represents. And yes, I read Mako as trans in the anime, both because she ends up being trans in the manga, and because her anime counterpart certainly doesn't contradict a trans reading. Takatsuki is a whole different can of worms, but as far as the anime goes, he says he wants to be seen as a boy, so I'll provide him that courtesy here. Mako is a clear foil to Shu. While Shu gets praise and validation heaped on by just about everyone around her, constantly told how cute she is, how good a girl she makes, Mako gets none of that. And as it is, Mako is pretty feminine herself, but her features aren't as soft, her brows aren't as delicate, her mannerisms aren't as cutesy, and so she gets looked over and goes largely unappreciated. Everyone thinks Shu is, of course, the natural Juliet, so there's a collective disappointment at Mako receiving that role. Shu's being used as the measuring stick, and there's no way Mako can reach the height that's being set when Shu's the only one given a pedestal to stand upon. This is shown the most clearly in the following episode, where Mako has to stand there and take the skeptical negative appraisal of Ninomiya, who specifically finds Mako lacking relative to Shu. And then again, when Yuki stops by to say hi, Mako has to hear a lamentation that Shu won't be Juliet, has to feel guilt over taking the part from the person who deserves it, as if she doesn't. Shu is sort of the idyllic trans girl that many of us would love to be. A bunch of those around her outright encourage her to present as female. She's incredibly cute, and she can pass pretty much perfectly without a hint of makeup. However, it's Mako who I most often hear people say they relate to. She's a much more accurate representation of the struggles of most trans people, who won't match up to binary gendered expectations as naturally and neatly as Shu does. If Shu is the fantasy, Mako is the reality. And while I think that fantasy has value in its own right, and certainly served as a comfort and a respite for myself personally, Mako and the representation of a broader experience that she brings with her is a linchpin to making it all work. Wandering Sun avoids falling into the trap of limiting itself to the prettiest and easiest to confront examples of transness, and instead stops to tell the stories of those who don't neatly slot into such narratives, as it does with this episode here. Not every trans narrative should concern itself with the blooming of spring, because most of us end up having to face
the end of summer.
無理だって分かってるんだけど、ジュリエットっていう女の子としてみんなに僕のこと見てもらいたかった。
It's fitting that as the plot reaches the first theatrical production, the series begins to study in earnest the nature of gender as performance. Our cast's class is putting on a genderbender play, and Mako can't help but lament the light this casts her performance in. She says that she didn't want anyone to laugh at her, but because of the nature of the play, that performance, the concept of her as a woman, is inescapably made, to some degree, the object of farce. This speaks to a larger Japanese trend of relegating trans people to the role of entertainment. There have actually been trans people with media prominence in Japan since the 60s. In some ways, you could say that trans people have greater visibility over there, and yet Japan still practices forced sterilization of trans people who want to get their gender legally changed. The sad fact is that while these people were elevated by the media and its audience to an extent, it was by and large a position of mockery that they were being elevated to. In the late 80s, a variety show called Waratte Ii Tomo introduced a segment featuring transgender guests titled Mr. Lady. One of the most prominent transgender media figures was Asakawa Hikaru, whose running gag was that her top half resembles her mother while her bottom half resembles her father. Now, I don't want to paint an unnuanced picture here. The simple fact that trans people were getting to be represented did real good. Seeing yourself in another trans person is one of the best ways to be able to discover or come to terms with your own identity. So this getting to exist at all had its benefits. Imperfect as it was, this kind of representation can still serve as the groundwork to achieve further advancements. Still though, all of this occurred in front of the backdrop of a society that, starting with the Blue Boy trial in 1965, had banned sex reassignment surgery, and would not decriminalize it until 1996. Theaters, television, and bars served as havens for trans people, but that was primarily because in those institutions, trans people were made into mere entertainment for the consumption of the masses, a novel product to be sold, but not considered seriously as an autonomous, conscious being. Later in the series, Shu is being badgered about if she'll dress up as a girl in that year's play by a kid called Doi. Don't worry, we'll get to him. This is after Shu has already gone to school in a girl's uniform and gotten in trouble for doing so, becoming the target of persistent bullying because of it, and she's told, it's not like you're going to school in it. Because that's the nature of the thing, isn't it? The performance, the farce, is asked of her, at the same time as her basic right to express that self in daily life is denied. After the play, Maho tells her she's got guts because the main character was basically just her, but the audience clapped and cheered for that character, when Shu herself would not, does not meet a similarly warm reception. People want their dancing monkey, but only at their whims, only when they play the music for her. If you'd like to read up on this history of trans media perception in Japan, I'll link my resource on the subject, From the Stage to the Clinic, Changing Transgender Identities in Post-War Japan, down below. Even though she's not a part of the play, Yuki also has to give a performance. In spite of having transitioned years ago, in spite of being beautiful, in spite of having been on a variety show herself as a trans woman, she still feels like it would be wiser, like it would be safer to present as male when she attends the play. As a trans person, she, reasonably, feels a very real threat that her mere presence in a middle school would arouse suspicions of danger, even though she's doing so with her adult boyfriend, and so she tries to mitigate that risk as much as possible by simply presenting as male. Because gender is a performance, life for trans people is, in a sense, one never-ending play. Welcome to the
Cultural Festival.
続きを小林さん。
あ、はい。けれど、新しい顔はひどい。金色だった髪は茶色く。
けれど、新しい顔はひどい。
鼻の頭には
赤いものがプチッとできた。
While puberty and its dysphoric effects is present in most episodes throughout the series, it's episode 7 that does the most to make viewers not just sympathetic to that experience, but able to empathize with it on some level. It builds this bridge of understanding with the planks of universal experiences. I'm sorry, that was very dorky of me. To start off the episode, Shu is reading a passage about the anxieties of someone losing their cuteness as they go into puberty, and the point that receives focus is the emergence of a zit. A pimple. There we go. Who doesn't relate to frustration about pimples or acne? This is a great way of doing things, because not only does this serve as a direct relatable example of an undesirable effect of puberty, pimples also bring to mind wider anxieties most people have experienced. You can feel your body changing, and feel like you're entering this awkward cocoon stage where for a while you'll just be this janky mismatch of adult and child elements, along with the random unpleasantries like pimples that are more specific to puberty itself. If there was any broader experience that could be tapped into to get across some idea of what Shu and Takatsuki are going through, it would be this one. It's at this point that I want to take a step back to make an examination of how the series conveys dysphoric experiences generally. Nowhere do we get someone dramatically chopping off their long hair while shouting, "I'm a boy, Dad!" or a girl crying in the shower with a razor and bloodied legs. Trans narratives should not at all be precluded from employing melodramatic storytelling, and as Alicia covered in her series on trans representation in Japanese media, the story of a trans man in Kinpachi Sensei, a beloved legacy J-drama, was a big moment for trans visibility. However, there's a special resonance to the understatedness, the sad resignation that is most often put on display by Wandering Sun. Here in episode 7, there's Takatsuki's disappointment at his period returning. As Shu is pondering the question of surgery, a girl rides by, skirt flowing a bit revealingly, and all Shu can do is look dejectedly downward at what she wishes was just like that girl. The most heart-wrenching one of these is when, after greeting Takatsuki, Shu notices that he's started wearing a bra. There's so much sadness there as she stares after him, acutely aware of how strongly Takatsuki wanted to avoid this. I didn't really pick up on these scenes when I first watched the series, or didn't make note of them at least, in part because they are presented so matter-of-factly. But watching again, knowing the deep pain that was housed beneath these unhappy faces carried a lot of emotion. All the characters can really do in these moments is to hide their sorrow behind
rosy cheeks.
女の格好したいんなら アンナちゃんと別れてよね。っていうか、アンナちゃんと付き合うなら女の格好すんのやめて。アンナちゃんはお前と違って普通の女の子なの。
ただの目立ちたがりって思われるんだろうな。
After digging into the performativity of gender 2 episodes prior, Wandering Sun uses episode 8 to explore the ways society reacts to a performance that breaks gender norms, and the fears these characters have of that backlash. Chi is a blessing and a curse for Takatsuki. On the one hand, he has reason to believe he could get away with wearing a boy's uniform because of the fact that Chi does so, but on the other, he has to worry about being seen as doing it just to imitate and gain attention because of the fact that Chi does so. In the end, he settles on taking a partial step in that direction, foregoing the typical ribbon of the girl's uniform and instead wearing a tie. He walks into school shoulders hunched, hoping to go unnoticed, but one of the teachers asks him to wait as he walks by, only to ask if Takatsuki tied it himself and expressed how impressed he is by that fact.
すごいね。俺は社会人になるまで知らなかったのにな。
Not only is he not reprimanded, but Takatsuki even receives a nod of respect from the establishment for achieving that milestone of masculinity. In many cases, girls can receive bits of praise for aspiring to the higher gender, as long as such aspirations are modest and non-threatening to the social order they're expected to fall into. Shu's gender expression this episode receives a bit more mixed reception. When Maho hears of Shu's strong interest in clothes from Anna, she angrily confronts her about it. As we'll continue to learn, Maho really does care about Shu, but this caring often comes in the form of pushing Shu to follow social norms, to be normal. She's rooting for Shu's relationship and doing what she thinks will best protect it. It turns out that she had little to worry about though, since when Shu brings up the fact that she enjoys dressing as a girl to Anna, she gets met with a simple, "Yeah, I knew." In fact, Anna goes ahead and asks Shu if she'd like to wear girls' clothes for their next date, and reassures Shu that she doesn't think she's disgusting at all. This does come with a bit of a rub though, that being Anna's comment that Shu is like a cute little sister. There's an element of this that's just endearingly awkward adolescent chastity. As Shu says, she isn't really sure if she wants to kiss Anna herself. But there's also a very real part of this that is heteronormativity at play, and this will continue as the series goes on and Shu's identity reveals itself as not a quirky hobby, but a core part of who she is. Anna does love Shu, but as she comes to view her more and more as a girl, she starts recontextualizing that love as something less romantic, certainly non-sexual, as Shu just being her little sister. Now, don't be too hard on Anna here, she doesn't know much at all about the subject, and even then she starts coming around pretty quickly. Her heart is in the right place. However, it is true that because of the society around Shu, this presentation of hers will cause road bumps like this, even with those who care for and accept her. A flourishing of life, the birth of new confidence, and new hardships brought on by that confidence arrives as these characters enter into spring.
僕も高槻さんみたいに。高槻さんみたいに。
Ooh boy, this episode is certainly a lot. The prior episodes look into the consequences of breaking gender expectations, and the fear of those consequences weighs heavily on the mind, while the buildup of tension as Shu prepares to wear a girl's uniform to school is only compounded by the tense discomfort of the unnerving scene with Doi, and by the end it feels like your heart's in your throat. Here the series explores the tricky subject of presenting a certain way for yourself versus presenting that way because you were coerced into doing so in service of others. Takatsuki finally wears the boy's uniform to school, and the weight this lifts off his shoulders is so palpable. It's an emotional experience in itself, just seeing how much relief and contentment he's brought by being able to wear it. His one real moment of discomfort comes when a classmate goes on for a bit about how awesome he looks and how he looks like a guy. Takatsuki doesn't want this to be some sort of event or spectacle, he wants it to be treated how it would for any other guy, as if it's nothing remarkable. Also, let me take this moment to note the crucially important fact that I ship Takatsuki x Chiba hard. Between this adorable scene where she comes in and straightens his collar up, and the one last episode where in flashback we see her saying she liked his hair when it was a bit longer, only for him to have indeed grown that hair out, along with many other great interactions of theirs throughout the show, I wish they could get together. Takatsuki'd certainly be better for her than transphobe McChristian Dick. Anyway, one moment where this change in Takatsuki's demeanor is really palpable is when he chats with Shu on the bridge. For a few episodes now he'd been distant towards her, and while a big part of that was definitely unresolved romantic stuff that came up when he learned Shu was dating Anna, stuff that finally did get resolved last episode, there's also definitely an element of Takatsuki finally loosening up that can be attributed to his newfound comfort and confidence as a result of getting to present as male. Having now acquired that curve-hiding bra, Shu can fall against his chest on the train and he's totally unfazed, whereas earlier in the series such contact really bothered him. Perhaps my favorite line of the whole series comes when Shu asks him about the bra.
きつくないの？っていうより、むしろちょっと楽なんだ。
楽なの？
気持ちの問題なのかな。
It's such an utterly perfect way of vocalizing the effect gender-validating presentation has. Shu's next line immediately undercuts the joy that one brings me, though. That sounds nice. There's definitely got to be some pain for Shu in seeing Takatsuki get to go through this euphoria while she's stuck in her ill-suited uniform, and witnessing Shu's dream where she gets to walk to school with them, Takatsuki in his boy's uniform and hers in her girl's, will utterly destroy you. That isn't the only reason she finally gets serious about wearing that uniform this episode, though. After spotting Shu with Yuki, Doi convinces Shu to take him to meet her. Now, this is sort of hilarious. I honestly have no idea what Doi was planning on doing here. Like, does he honestly think this gorgeous adult woman is gonna swoon in the face of the overwhelming romantic prowess of a 12-year-old guy? I guess, look, in his defense, I've been a 12-year-old guy before too. It's a weird place to be. Testosterone is a strange beast. Unless you're into it, that's cool. I may have lacked his sheer unbridled confidence, but there were certainly times where I at least fantasized that I'd be able to charm an older woman. Dark days, a lot of gender repression and coping. Anyway, Doi doesn't get his date with Yuki, but what he does gain is the knowledge that she's transgender, or as he later oh so eloquently puts it, I never imagined a guy could be that hot. In short, Doi represents chaser culture, and boy did that taste of Yuki get him thirsty. The next day he tells Shu, dude, you should try being a chick. Really has a way with words, this guy. And that leaves her conflicted. She asks herself why her heart is pounding, and while some of that is just nervousness and embarrassment towards Doi, a part of her definitely feels validated by his interest. I considered it a big milestone when I got my first chaser in my Twitter DMs. His hey was unassuming enough, but once he dropped the miss, I knew exactly what I had my hands on. It is a powerful hit of serotonin to have someone that is into girls reach out to you out of attraction. Doi tells Shu to walk home with him, and they head to her house together. This scene is tough to watch. It's immediately infused with a sexual element as Doi asks if anyone's home and Shu informs him that they're alone in the house here. When Doi closes the door to Shu's room, we sit on that still image of the shut door for an agonizing 11 seconds. And then once it cuts to the room, there's another 7 seconds of silence while Doi stares at her before saying, geez, you're cute. It feels gross, it feels threatening, it feels dehumanizing. In a word, it feels fetishizing. Every shot here is held for so long, every silence is so drawn out. It is uncomfortable perfection. Doi tells her she should come to school dressed like this, and here we go again. As with earlier, the norm-breaking presentation that is accepted and encouraged is not when a trans person does so of their own accord, but when that presentation is being done in service of an audience, usually a fetishistic straight male one. So now, her desire to wear a girl's uniform is tainted somewhat. If she does so, is she doing it for herself, for Doi, for both? Thankfully, she's got Chi to give her the tea, sis.
わかんないけどさ。
Chi warns Shu of the backlash she's very likely to face if she goes to school in the girl's uniform, but says that ultimately the decision is up to Shu, not to her. Takatsuki isn't quite as level-headed, getting angry at Doi for putting Shu up to this, but as Shu insists, Doi had something to do with it, he suggested it, but he is not why she's ultimately chosen to do it. Shu's core thought on the matter is expressed later in the episode in one little heartbreaking line.
僕も高槻さんみたいに 楽になりたい。
That's it. That's all she wants. That's all most any of these kids want. All we want. To be comfortable with ourselves, and to be unimpeded by unfair forces in trying to achieve that. I'm sure you've noticed by now that I've been doing this cute gimmicky little thing where I end off each section with that episode's title. Some I had to contrive a little more than others to get them to work, but this one just really wasn't gonna happen given that I don't talk about Anna at all in this section. So instead, I'll just say that I've got a real dang
cool girlfriend.
僕だけ保健室に連れてかれて、僕だけお母さんが迎えに来た。ちいちゃんや高槻さんを誰も笑わなかったのに。僕だけ笑われた。
The thing that always strikes me most when witnessing the aftermath of Shu going to school in a girl's uniform is the extent to which the reaction to it from any individual of authority is one of warmth, and lacking any particular negative judgment of Shu for it. Her mother asks if she's been getting bullied, and then suggests this ended up happening because Maho used to dress Shu up in girls' clothes. Her father heads to the convenience store with her and shares an anecdote about how she's always been particularly feminine. One of the teachers extends sympathy, acknowledging that this must have been hard on Shu, and when she says that she shouldn't have gone to school in the uniform, that teacher replies with, "Why's that?" This isn't a condescending, "Now tell me why what you did was wrong." It's the teacher actively questioning, for Shu, why she shouldn't have been able to do that. Basically, every individual in a position of authority as a part of the establishment is outright eager to help Shu. In the next episode, her teacher is careful in making sure that Shu feels comfortable putting on the play with the class, that she doesn't feel pressured to join in, and is clearly visibly delighted when she says she wants to be a part of it, jumping at the chance to suggest she write the script again like she did for last year's. But that near total lack of ill will doesn't matter. Shu's still getting screwed, and an expression of her true identity which would harm no one is still getting repressed. It is the transphobia which is baked into the system itself that's causing this, and it can inflict its cruel results in the total absence of individual attitudes of transphobia. A lot of those on the right scoff at the concept of systematic oppression, and a common little phrase of reasoning among skeptic YouTubers back when I watched them was, "Show me the individual act of racism and I'll be right there alongside you to fight it." But you cannot just claim that people are being oppressed in the absence of that.
Most people probably aren't racist. Therefore, we can't just explain the Western world as being inherently racist, because some minorities do worse than others, and some minorities do worse than white people.
The closest thing to individuals acting prejudicially is the ensuing bullying from Shu's classmates, but most of that is a reaction to Shu being isolated out as a target. Shu was ostracized by the system, Shu's behavior was marked as aberrant by that system, so it's only natural that these kids, who would know no better, would take that as a signal to bully her. While none of the representatives of the system exhibit transphobia, her classmates read the transphobia inherent to that system itself in its punishment of Shu for merely expressing her transness and act accordingly. Maho says at one point that if she never leaves her room again, it's Shu's fault. But why? Because if you're searching desperately for an individual to ascribe blame to, as we've been taught to do, Shu is the only real option. None of the individual authority figures did this, they're just following the rules. Do you get it? That's the magic trick. There you go. This isn't an accident. The system is set up in such a manner as to abdicate any individual responsibility for what it does, and thus the only person left to be blamed is the victim, because if they hadn't done the thing that caused the punishment, none of it would have happened in the first place. Never mind whether that punishment was just. They're the only individual who actively made a decision to do a thing, and that's the only concept most people are willing to understand. As long as society insists upon viewing things only through the lens of individual people who are at fault, oppression will never be sufficiently addressed, because this twisted sleight of hand trick will keep working to fool that society into ignoring actions that are taken by a system instead of a person. What do those classmates say as they lock her out of the classroom? "Hey, you're going to get in trouble." "It'll be fine, our teacher isn't scary at all." In other words, "It'll be fine, we won't get in trouble for this. It'll be fine, the authority is on our side. It'll be fine, this kid was punished for what they did, so clearly punishing them is fine." Shu is punished for wearing a skirt to school. Her classmates will go unpunished for targeting a student with harassment and impeding her education. A side has been picked. The policy is that people like Shu, or people like my girlfriend, or people like me get punished for being like that. That's the rule things operate by. A side has been picked, regardless of any personal sympathies from the people within the system that picked that side. Fuck the state of this world, and fuck those who work to maintain that status quo.
どうして着たい服を着たらいけないんだろう。私はずっとそう思っていました。でも前にニトリ君が言ったこと、私は何も言われないからというのは少し当たってるなと思います。
And Shu knows what's happening. She can see all this. Just as well as those classmates picked up on the judgment that had been made, she watched as her true self was disallowed from existence. It's this unfairness that she fixates on. I was the only one taken to the nurse's office. I was the only one whose mother came to get them. Nobody laughed at Chi or Takatsuki. They only laughed at me. She doesn't want to ever go back there, and why would she when she just witnessed that institution throw her into the line of fire like a rag doll? She doesn't want to ever go back there and not get to be herself again, because even with all the nerves and uncertainty and anxiety wearing that uniform filled her with, God did it feel good to have that weight lifted off of her, and God does she not want to put those shackles back on and drag herself back to school in them. She got that taste of relief, and that is all she will ever be allowed to have of it. When she heads over to Yuki's place, Shu is asked why she'd go to such an extreme, and the answer is because she needed to. She knows how much joy presenting as female brings her, saw how uplifting it was for Takatsuki to be able to do so. She needed to try to do so. She couldn't stand to have there be even the slightest possibility that this happiness was something she'd be allowed to have, and not check to see. Yuki's expression here is so hard to look at. It is utter empathy, utter sorrow, utter pain. She knows that an event this dramatic meant literal years of depression, wasting away in her room, all alone, nothingness, and knows this could very well mean something similar for Shu. Heartbreaking does not even approach giving it justice, and I curse the English language for being so insufficient in this instance. This scene of each day's representative of the group coming to Shu's house to give her the work and cheer her up one after the other ruins me. It's such an integral show of solidarity and care. At the end of the episode, as a result of an argument that breaks out while planning one of these visits to Shu, we get one of the hardest to decipher exchanges in the whole show. Now, especially knowing about manga stuff with Takatsuki, the lines, "No, I couldn't see you as a real man," and "Now it just seems like you hate being a woman" from Chiba seem pretty bad, but I think there's a lot more to this than just those, admittedly pretty eyebrow-raising, lines. Chiba says that when he wore the boy's uniform, he looked more like a tomboy, but crucially, she says that there are guys who look like that too. Chiba then says, "It would have been better if you'd worn what you wanted to wear." What seems to be getting said here is not that Takatsuki can't be a boy or is insufficient as a boy, because as Chiba said, you can look like he does and be a boy, but rather that by adopting an inauthentic, performative masculinity, he actually ends up coming off as less genuinely a man than if he had expressed his own masculinity, in whatever manner it would actually manifest for him. That's why Chiba says it seems more like he just hates being a woman, because Takatsuki is presenting less as a guy and more just as a not a girl. And hey, if Takatsuki was non-binary, that'd be all cool too. But what is being gotten at here is that this not a girl presentation of his doesn't reflect his true feelings. You have to decide how much stock you put into Chiba's analysis of Takatsuki here, of course, but judging from his reaction, it feels more like she was right, or at least generally on the mark. As Takatsuki says earlier in the series to Shu, he's not planning on changing the way he speaks, and by that he meant he doesn't plan to stop using the more feminine watashi to refer to himself. He doesn't feel the need to use the more typical boku, so there definitely is some rejection of fully conventional masculinity on his part. And this lines up with earlier exchanges, like when Chiba said he should grow his hair out, when she again remarked, "There's guys that look like that too." Now, there is some reason to doubt my reading here. What it would mean is that Takatsuki is naturally more of an androgynous or feminine boy, and there isn't much to support the idea that he isn't just a typically masculine slacks and t-shirt guy, outside of his reaction to Chiba suggesting that that presentation is inauthentic coming from him. Knowing the way the manga goes, you could easily just conclude that this is Chiba saying, "No, you're not a real man, you're just running away from your womanhood for whatever reason." And hey, if you interpret it that way, I certainly won't fault you. But analyzing the anime on its own terms, death of the manga and all that, I do believe there's a lot more nuance here. Chiba isn't a TERF, she just thinks boys can wear skirts too, and that's pretty dang woke. As we see though, sometimes girls can't wear skirts, and so Shu is left thinking about why
they only laughed at me.
シュウ君の話を聞いて、そりゃあね、 思い出したかも、いろんなこと。
Even with all of that heaviness of the last episode, Wandering Sun is still ultimately a cheerful, leaning story of its characters overcoming the challenges in their path and finding happiness. In this episode, we get to see Yuki's story, and the even more dour reality it acknowledges. Well, I should say that some of us get to see that story. You see, Wandering Sun has 12 episodes, but when it was broadcast, only 11 episodes ended up airing. Episode 10 is actually episodes 10 and 11 cut together into one episode, and then on the disc release of the series, all 12 episodes were present uncut. As is often the case when Crunchyroll gets the rights for things, they have the TV version streaming rights for Wandering Sun. And so if you watched the series on there, you'll have missed out on a few scenes that add valuable characterization that had to be cut, along with this whole little section on Yuki's backstory. There's also never been a physical release of the series in the West, so there is no legal means of watching the entire show. Thankfully, fan subs of it do exist, so even if you want to watch the first 9 episodes and the finale on Crunchyroll, I highly suggest torrenting episodes 10 and 11 so that you can experience it in full. It's really worth watching because, as I said, Yuki's scenes here provide a very valuable expansion of perspective beyond the story of our main characters. We don't know what specifically caused Yuki's bullying, if it was simply her being effeminate, or if her desire to be a girl was known information. We do know that unlike Shu, when she wore the girl's uniform, it was not by choice. She was forced into it, and forced into confessing to some random guy. This is the line that gets the most focus, being repeated later on in the episode. This line that encapsulates her total lack of agency in this situation. Everything that she should have gotten to do, that she should have gotten to experience, was denied her. She didn't get to wear the right uniform to school, didn't ever get to confess to her middle school crush, and instead she was forced into acting out a cruel, hollow facsimile of that. That same day, she left school early and would never return again. She never got to have her middle school graduation, never got to go to high school. She spent 3 long years that should have been spent learning, growing, and having fun with friends, wasting away in her room, listless and despondent. And that was the best choice she could have made, probably, given that 43% of transgender students in Japan report being victimized for more than 5 years due to their identity. All she could really do is lay there and wait until she'd be able to get access to hormones and start living her life. The general rule is that you have to be a legal adult to get on HRT, and Japan's age of legal adulthood is 20. It's possible to start hormones at 18 with parental consent, but as it is, that can be tricky and uncertain. And given that we see a flashback of Yuki's mother insisting she get a suit and saying, "Boys really do look best in formal wear," we can assume that her parents wouldn't be the supportive type. So that's it. At age 14, she was presented with the reality that she would have to stay like that, constantly taken as a joke, never viewed with respect as who she truly is, for the next 6 years of her life. She holed up in her room and faced that fate, in total social isolation aside from the occasional trips to the batting cage her caring older brother took her out on. Shu's story has plenty of hardships, is often sad, is often unfair, but the mere fact that she gets to have a social group who understands and supports her, who to some degree help protect her from the others, means that even with everything she has to face, she is still better off than huge amounts of other people in her position. The contrast between their 2 stories emphasizes that main idea of the series, how important having those people who understand you really is. Knowing Yuki's story made it absolutely clear just how fucking hard it actually often is to be trans in Japan, and she's someone who made it. The world of this series is mean as hell to Yuki, and yet it isn't even as mean as real life often is. Suicidal ideation among trans people in Japan is over 70%, and discovering your identity at a younger age greatly increased rates of self-mutilation, including suicide attempts, among male to female transgender people, for the reasons Yuki's story lays out. There you go. There's your odds as someone in her possession. Here's your dice, now go have fun rolling them. The line of Yuki's that really gets to me is what she says to Shu after telling her about her past. "Now I really love my life." Now she does, meaning there's another side to that coin. The way she expresses the hatred of her life that she had back then through implication here, without literally stating it, like she doesn't even want to give voice to what her feelings were back then, speaks so much more to her hardship than anything else she could have said. What matters, though, is that she was able to move past that. What matters is that in the end, she got to have her confession.
あれ？声ちょっと変？
あ、うん。でも、いいんだ。これで。
And finally, after all of that emotional hardship, we come to the final episode. We come to the idea of acceptance. Shu accepts the changes that are coming and resolves to face them. In the shooting star exhibit, she doesn't wish for her voice to stop changing or to become a girl. She rejects those wishes as the thought of them arises because she knows that won't fix things. She is prepared to take on the difficult life that's laid out for her. Finally, she gets to dress up with Chiba and Takatsuki again. Finally, she's comfortable enough to accept the offers of clothing and take those home with her. Remember those directions on the road she was following all the way back in episode 1? Well, finally she's walking her own path, in opposition to the one society has set out in front of her. But it's all the characters, not just Shu, who reach a state of acceptance in this finale. Yuki, inspired by Shu's bravery in wearing the girl's uniform to school, presents as female when she attends the cultural festival this time around. I like to think that part of her motivation in doing so is to show solidarity, that she's thinking that if someone does notice she's trans, that will serve to normalize and demystify the concept of a trans person, and thus help make things better for Shu and those like her. Chiba, after expressing discontent at the start of the episode towards Takatsuki's haircut, to some degree accepts his desire to wear masculine clothes. After she has him put on a dress, and they both agree he looks terrible in it. After Mako says she isn't cute, Shu insists that she is, and she accepts the idea that actually, maybe that's true. When Chiba says that she used to think Shu was special, but now that her voice is changing realizes that Shu is actually ordinary, just like any of the other boys, Takatsuki refutes that. He says Shu is special, but so is Chiba, and Mako, and Sasa, and even himself. I think here Takatsuki accepts a less rigid, more personal conception of gender. Shu isn't just like any of the other boys, but neither is Takatsuki himself. Each person is their own idiosyncratic individual before they're a member of any given group you might classify them under. Even Doi finds his own acceptance, finally accepting the fact that Shu has her own agency. He suggests that she come back to class, but having learned this lesson also says, "I won't force anything on you though." It's a perfect concept to end off on. As the series asks that the audience go out and be more accepting of others, it drives this home by having its cast all come to accept themselves or aspects of the world around them in its final episode. And to end the episode off, finally Shu steps out into the spotlight as a girl, to perform the play whose title is her self-actualization, Boku wa Onnanoko, contenting herself with the fact that she is forever a wandering sun. And finally, after all of those words, over 10,000 of them now, we come to the conclusion of the video. The message the series ends off on might seem a bit naive or shallow, but I think it works really well. The series says to trans people, or really marginalized people generally, I know, I'm right there with you, this can really suck, but if you accept how things will be, you can get through it, and it'll be worth it to do so. That doesn't mean we should accept how things work. Hell, I've done my part in repudiating that the best I could. But I'm gonna look at you and say that whether you're a Shu or you're a Yuki, you can get through that, and you can find happiness, even if life is hell right now. There's a future out there for you where then you'll love your life. And then it tells people outside that group to look around them at what's going on, recognize how cruel and unjust it is, and do something about it. The central thread of the series is how integral having someone who can understand you is. You understand these people now, so go help them, be it through fighting the system, or just being there on a one-to-one personal level. Wandering Sun has done so much for me on a personal level. It helped me realize my identity, breaking me out of an almost decade-long repressed emotional haze. Since that first video, I've formed the first genuine social groups I've been able to have. I've had writing of mine about the series published in an actual book. I've relocated from one coast of the country to the other to move in with the love of my life. And all of these are direct immediate effects of this series. And as wild and surreal as this fact will never cease to be to me, my own work on the series has in turn had positive impacts on at least a handful of people. The strongest feeling I have towards this series is gratitude, because more so than any other piece of media in existence, Wandering Sun has resulted in my life being so much better than it would have been otherwise. I can't help but feel like this show saved my life, and I can give no stronger argument for it accomplishing what it set out to do than that one. This is proactive media in action.
So, first off, thank you for getting this far if you have in fact done so.
This is by far the largest project I've undertaken, and the simple fact that some of you sat through to the end of it is pretty remarkable in itself. After taking up an hour of your time, I'm not quite done asking for things yet, though. Seeing as this was such an endeavor, I'd certainly like this video to be seen as widely as possible, so any sharing around of it would be much appreciated. As would, of course, any financial support of what I'm doing here, either on Patreon or as a one-time donation through PayPal or Ko-fi. All that fun stuff is linked down below. A hearty thank you also goes out to everyone who was a part of this project: Mathwiz, Kat, Elijah, Joe, Gianni, Callum, Kami, Jack, H-Bomb, who for some reason follows me, Alicia, who in addition to lending her voice to the video also conducted research that was extremely helpful to it. Go check her videos out. And, of course, Zaria, whose careful mix of emotional support and, when necessary, pushiness in getting me to get my work done made this video possible in the first place. The biggest thank you of all is, as always, reserved for those supporting me on Patreon. Psyker, Mathways97, Jonathan Conley, Tyler Monk, Teencho37, Lord Liquid Bacon III, Elaine Aldfelt, David McCown, Smokeweed Sephiroth 420, JMam4747, Chase Sutter, Dove, Lucas Holcomb, Randall Hudson, Elaine Gilstrom, John Smith, Mad Marks, Booty Warrior GT, and everyone else on there. Thank you so much.